this presentation, we're going to be looking at a variety of workflow improvements in Maya 2013 that will increase your productivity. The improvements cover many everyday tasks such as file referencing, hardware rendering, skinning, and managing complex nodes. With the file referencing enhancements, artists can more easily segment their scenes to work in parallel and better manage complexity. Thanks to targeted improvements to both the user interface and the underlying architecture, file referencing is now a more natural and intuitive part of the Maya workflow. It's actually all handled directly inside of the outliner window. We have a new file reference node that allows me to quickly see which references are in my scene, as well as whether or not they're loaded or unloaded. If I right mouse click on top of that, I have all the tools directly inside of the outliner that allow me to work with this reference. We now have the ability to preview unloaded content. And what this does is it allows me to see if a reference has any nested references inside of it. So if we preview this reference, you can see that it does indeed have a second reference that was embedded inside of it. If I want to load those references in, again, all I have to do is right mouse click inside of the outliner, go up to the reference node, and just simply reload those objects into the scene. So now we have our referenced vehicle inside of here, and this car actually has some animation on the door. One of the things that previously inside of Maya, you weren't able to edit any function curves on referenced objects. We now have the ability to change that as a system preference. So if I jump into my graph editor, you can see that those function curves are grayed out. If I want to get the option to edit those curves, all I have to do is go into my system preferences, go to animation, and just go and grab the allow reference edits. So as soon as I do that and we save this back out, I can grab that edit and begin editing that curve. So as you can see here, we kind of get that door sort of in an area where that function curve will have an effect on it. You can see that we have the ability to actually edit the animation curves directly on the reference. Now obviously if I wanted to get that information pushed back into the reference, I can manage that simply by going back to the outliner, right mouse clicking on top of it, going to the reference node and saying save edit, or actually signing those all to an offline file. So those are the improvements that have been made to the file referencing inside of Maya 2013. Next, we're going to look at some improvements that were made to Viewport 2.0 in the new node editor. Viewport 2.0 now offers a more functionally complete, high-performance, high-quality viewport. With Viewport 2.0, artists can evaluate their work in a higher fidelity interactive environment in order to make better creative decisions. In this example, we're going to use a newly supported ramp shader and layered shader to add some visual complexity to this Porsche's car paint. Basically what I want to do is I want to have a base shader with a clear coat on top of it, and we're going to use the node editor to assist us in this task. You'll notice in the node editor that it says to begin creating a node, just hit the tab key. So once I do that and I start typing ramp, I can then use the up and down arrow keys to generate the ramp shader, which is going to become my clear coat. So I've got the clear coat, I've got that original blend that we'll use for the base coat, so now I need to create another new node, a layered shader, to join these two rendering algorithms together. So we'll just go ahead and create layered shader. So now that we've got that, we're almost complete. The next thing that we need to do is go ahead and get an environment reflection map. So we'll grab that environment probe and we'll just sort of drop that guy up there, and we'll just expand this node editor up. So the node editor takes the windows that used to be the hypergraph, the hypershade, and the connection editor, and it combines it all into one easy-to-use workflow for managing complex node networks. When working with the nodes, we can view them at 3 different levels. Right now we're viewing all the nodes in their compressed level. So it basically shows the node with one compressed line joining it to any of the other nodes that it may have a relationship to. At any given time, you can start to toggle through the display and say, show me the active connections. Now obviously for the ramp shader, it's just out color going to the shading group. The next choice is to say, show me all possible connections. And this essentially is what the connection editor would be previously inside of Maya. So what we'll do is we'll just expand this out a couple of times, all possible connections, and we'll just drag and drop to make this relationship of that environment ball into the reflected color of that ramp shader. So we'll drop that in there. And now that we've done that, we can kind of compress that guy back down, and let's begin building up our layered shader. So we'll just drag this into the first color slot for that layered shader and put our ramp on top of that. Just swap the order around here, and we'll go ahead and we'll select this object here, and we'll assign this layered shader to it, and just for fun we'll increase that swatch size. So right now what we have is we've got our clear coat layered on top of our base coat, and that clear coat really doesn't have much happening, right? It's essentially it's a chrome ball, and that's not exactly what we want to have happen. So let's jump into that ramp shader and start modifying some of the attributes. So the ramp shader really is a very powerful, it's almost like a Swiss Army knife shader inside of Maya. We can use it to do all kinds of cool things, and these ramps let us modify a lot of the attributes. Many of them are based on glancing angle, and that's what these ramps are going to be used for the reflectivity. So it allows us to get these really nice Fresnel effects. So the left of the ramp is when when the normals are facing toward the camera, the right of the ramp, or when the normals are facing away from the camera. So by just grabbing a handle, inserting it in there, and dropping it down, you can see that I get that really nice sort of almost car paint look automatically here. So we've got really strong reflections down this glancing angle, but if we view down the side of the car, the reflections are very, very weak. Now obviously I wanted this to be sort of a car paint that had a base shader with a transparent clear coat on top of it, so we'll just go up to our transparency for this object, or for this shader, and we'll zero that 100%, and I might want to go back into this guy and just drop that ever so slightly. So what's happening here is we've actually got two different specularity settings layered on top of each other, one coming from the blend and one coming from the ramp shader. The one from the ramp shader obviously has this really kind of abrupt glancing angle reflection happening, or that Fresnel effect happening, but this gives us that overall sort of complex shade of a car paint, and I think it does a really good job. So the next thing that we want to talk about is some of the improvements that we've made in Viewport 2.0 and our ability to deal with transparency. So let's just go ahead and display these joints. We'll frame in on this head here and sort of spin the camera around. So as I start to spin this camera around, notice the effect of that hair, which is a bunch of different objects and some polygon cards all stacked up on top of each other. They kind of start to pop, and the reason that's happening is because the default transparency algorithm that we're using isn't that sophisticated. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and switch this over to the new depth peeling transparency algorithm, and it's going to look really close to what a software renderer would look like. So if we turn on depth peeling and we close that guy back down and I start to spin around this head, notice how much better this looks. The quality is actually pretty astounding, and it even deals with objects that are over top of each other. So here, you know, we're viewing through several different layers, probably 6 different layers of transparency, and it just works. It just looks right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the ability for us to represent area lights in the viewport. So right now I've got this kind of big box lights that should be up here where the sun's streaming in. I'm just representing that with these 2 spotlights. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this one. Let's close that door down really quickly. We're going to switch this spotlight over here to become an area light, and you're going to see the specularity pattern change relatively drastically when we do that. So let's go ahead and grab that area light, or that spotlight, and switch it over to an area light. So as soon as I do that, you can see that it's changed the overall specularity, and obviously because it's an area light, the larger it gets, the more light it sends into the scene, and you can see that we get these very long highlights happening now. You know, it gives you this really nice diffuse kind of box light look to that, and obviously as we spin around this car, maybe tone that down a little bit more, but that kind of diffuse soft light looks great. Obviously if you wanted to make it more like a point light, you can just scale that guy down and it'll become a tighter highlight. But that is something that we've been working on for a little bit, and it looks pretty good. Alright, so the final thing that I want to talk about really quickly is a new skinning algorithm choice that we have when you're setting up your initial bind. So let's go ahead and turn off the depth of field here, and let's just get those joints back on. And what I've got is I've got some geometry here that hasn't been bound into this character yet, and it's got this sort of zigzag pattern happening where they're sort of overlapping each other, and this normally would get really confused about what should be attached to what joint. But if we just go into our skin bind, pull up smooth bind, and just turn on, instead of classic linear, let's do a DQ for that guy. We'll put this to heat map, and we'll just kind of crank that up right around there, and we'll hit apply, and just like that, 2 seconds. Let's turn on my controls for my character here, grab this leg and begin moving that around, and you can see that even though those vertices were zigzagging in between each other, it had the ability to go ahead and make those relationships and kind of join it in exactly the way you'd want. So those are a few of the improvements that have been made, general workflow improvements inside of Maya. We looked at some of the file referencing improvements. We talked about Viewport 2.0 and the enhancements that were made there. The node editor gives us the ability to manage complex nodes inside of Maya in a much elegantly way. And we finished off with the heat map skinning, which is kind of like a single-click magic button. It just makes the skin work